It wasn't supposed to be this way. I came here for peace. A quiet weekend getaway. No distractions, no noise, just the stillness of nature surrounding me. But now, as I sit in the dim light of a flickering lantern, my mind races, and the sounds outside the cabin strange, unnatural, keep me awake, wondering if I'll make it through the night. I've always been a fan of the wilderness. Growing up, my parents took us camping every summer, teaching us how to survive in the wild. The best way to set up a tent, how to catch fish with our bare hands, even the occasional squirrel for dinner. I loved the feeling of being disconnected from the world, immersed in a place that felt so untamed, so primal. There was something comforting about being on the edge of civilization, surrounded only by the whisper of the wind through the trees. But now, sitting here alone in a dilapidated cabin, the wilderness feels different. It feels hostile. I was supposed to be here for 2 days. The cabin was isolated, nestled deep in the woods, a few miles from the nearest town. The owner, an older man named Simon, had assured me that it was the perfect escape. I booked it through a website that specialized in rustic getaways, and the reviews were glowing. Perfect solitude, they said. A true retreat from modern life. Maybe I was naive to believe them. I arrived late in the afternoon, the sun sinking lower and lower in the sky, as I unloaded my bags and began to settle in. The cabin was a wooden structure, a bit weathered but solid, with a small porch and a crackling fireplace inside. The air was crisp, the trees surrounding the cabin casting long shadows on the ground. There was a sense of foreboding in the air, a tension that I dismissed as part of the charm of being so far out in the wilderness. It was when night fell that things began to feel off. At first, it was just the usual sounds of the forest, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, the crack of a branch breaking in the wind. But then, I started hearing something else. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, as if someone was walking just outside the cabin, deliberately avoiding the creaky floorboards, but still moving with purpose. The sound was soft at first, almost unnoticeable, but as the minutes passed, it grew louder, closer. I froze. My hand instinctively reached for the flashlight on the small wooden table beside me. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't tell if I was hearing things or if someone or something was really out there. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely a whisper in the still night air. But no answer came. The footsteps stopped. A chill crept down my spine as I listened, straining to hear any other sound. But all that followed was the wind rustling the branches above. Trying to shake off the creeping unease, I went to the door and peered out through the small, dusty window. The darkness outside was absolute. I couldn't see a thing, only black shapes shifting in the wind. No signs of life, no movement. I turned back to the cabin, telling myself it was just an animal, a deer or a raccoon, maybe a bear, though I doubted it. Still, I locked the door and bolted the windows shut, even though I knew it wouldn't stop anything if something wanted to get in. It would. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. I was here to get away from stress, not create new anxieties. But then the knocking started. It wasn't loud at first, more like a tap tap tap, soft but deliberate, coming from the back of the cabin. I froze again, heart hammering in my chest. Was it the wind? No, it wasn't the wind. This was a clear, distinct knock. Tap, tap, tap. I grabbed the flashlight again, my hand shaking now as I inched toward the back door. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was just someone else out here. Maybe Simon had sent someone to check on the cabin. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The knocking was too rhythmic, too precise. I opened the door cautiously, the creaking of the hinges sounding far too loud in the silence. The flashlight beam flickered as I swept it across the small porch and the yard beyond, casting long shadows on the ground. Nothing. No one. Just trees, their twisted branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal hands. The knocking continued. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from behind the cabin now, further down the path that led to the woods. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear it. The footsteps from earlier had returned, slow, deliberate, creeping closer. I should have stayed inside. I should have locked the door, drawn the curtains, and called the police. But instead, I did something stupid. I stepped out into the night. The air was thick and cold, and the ground beneath my boots was soft, damp from the earlier rain. My breath fogged in the frigid air as I moved toward the noise, each step feeling heavier than the last. The flashlight barely cut through the darkness, the beam shaking in my hand as I turned toward the sound. "Hello," I called again, my voice a little louder this time, but still trembling. "Who's out there?" No answer. But the knocking stopped. For a long, unbearable moment, there was only silence. Then, just as I was about to turn back, I saw something. A figure, a shadow, barely visible against the dark trees, standing motionless in the distance. I froze. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a person? A trick of the light? I couldn't tell, but I could feel it. The presence. It was watching me. Before I could react, it moved. Not fast, but with purpose, taking slow, measured steps toward me. The figure was tall, its form indistinct in the dim light, but I could see the outline of a hooded cloak, the tattered edges hanging like torn fabric. The person, or whatever it was, didn't speak, didn't make a sound, just kept walking, closing the distance between us. I stumbled backward, heart racing in my chest. The flashlight's beam shook wildly as I tried to get a better look, but the more I focused, the more the figure seemed to blur, like it was slipping in and out of focus. My pulse was a drumbeat in my ears as I fought to steady my breath. "Stay away," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was talking to the figure or trying to reassure myself. I turned to run back to the cabin, but before I could make it to steps, I heard a voice, low, guttural, barely a whisper, but it was unmistakable. "Don't go inside." I froze, my heart leaping into my throat as the voice echoed in my mind. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone, the strange, rasping undertone, like it wasn't even human. It felt like something from elsewhere. "Don't go inside." The whisper came again, closer this time. My breath caught, my legs like lead. I turned slowly, trying not to make any noise. The figure, the thing, was still there, standing at the edge of the trees, no more than 30 feet away. The shadow seemed to pulse, shifting in a way that wasn't natural. It didn't just stand still. It undulated, like the air around it was alive. I couldn't make out a face, just a darkness where it should have been. But I could feel its eyes on me, and I knew it was not human. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out. My voice was barely a whisper, swallowed by the wind and the trees. The figure didn't answer, but its shape seemed to grow, stretching upward, like it was rising from the ground itself. The trees around it seemed to bow, the wind shifting direction, swirling unnaturally as if the earth itself were bending to its will. My stomach turned, a coldness creeping in that had nothing to do with the temperature. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered out. Darkness closed in, thick and suffocating, and for a moment, I couldn't see anything at all. Panic surged. My heart hammered in my chest. The hairs on my arms stood on end, and I could feel the presence moving closer, an oppressive weight pressing down on me. I fumbled with the flashlight, shaking it, trying to get it to work again. The beam blinked back to life just in time to see the figure take a step forward. It didn't walk like a person. Its movements were fluid, like it was gliding, its feet barely touching the ground. The shadows around it stretched and warped as though the very fabric of reality was bending. I took a step back, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The voice came again, but this time, it was stronger, more insistent. "You should have left when you had the chance." I didn't understand. Leave? I hadn't done anything. The cabin was supposed to be safe, but I could feel it, something deep, primal, telling me that I was already into deep. It knew something I didn't. The figure was almost on top of me now. It loomed just a few feet away, and despite the overwhelming darkness, I could still feel its presence, its gaze. The air was growing colder, the wind picking up, biting at my skin like tiny needles. "Please," I gasped, my mind scrambling for some kind of reasoning, something to anchor me to this reality. "What do you want?" The thing shifted, and I saw a flash of something movement within the shadows. Something more than just a figure. I could see glimpses of its eyes, countless pairs of eyes, all staring back at me from within the cloak of darkness. I blinked, trying to clear the image, but when I opened my eyes again, the eyes were gone, replaced by the void. Then, a sudden pressure slammed into my chest, the weight of it, an invisible force that left me gasping for air. My limbs locked in place. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I was being pulled in. The voice came again, now almost a growl. "You belong to this place now." I struggled, trying to break free, but it was like my body no longer obeyed me. My mind screamed, fighting against the invisible chains that held me in place. The cabin. I thought desperately, I need to get back to the cabin. I gathered the last of my strength and pushed. The force lifted from my chest, just enough for me to break free of it, to stumble backward. My legs barely supported me, but I managed to turn and run back to the cabin, my feet slipping on the damp earth beneath me. Behind me, I could hear the whisper again, softer now, but still there. "You can't escape. You're already a part of this place." I didn't dare look back. My only focus was the cabin, the flickering light from inside the window barely visible through the trees. The wind howled in my ears, and the earth beneath my feet seemed to shift, as though the ground itself was alive, guiding me toward the cabin, pulling me in like a net. My lungs burned with each desperate breath as I pushed forward, feeling that through the door of a dark presence was behind me. I made it to the porch, stumbling up the steps. My hand fumbled for the door handle, my pulse racing. Slammed it behind me, locking it with trembling hands. Inside, I was safe, for now, but I could still feel it, the presence, the weight of something watching me from just beyond the walls. It wasn't just in my head, I could feel it in my bones. The air inside the cabin was thick, heavier than it should have been. The darkness outside seemed to press against the windows, the trees too close, like they were crowding in on me. I backed away from the door, my back hitting the cold wooden wall. I sank to the floor, trembling. The lantern on the table flickered, its light casting long shadows across the room. It was barely enough to keep the darkness at bay, but it was something. I sat there, breathing in shallow gasps, trying to gather my thoughts. I had to make sense of this. The figure, the voice, the eyes in the shadows. It was too much to take in all at once. Was this some kind of hallucination? A trick of the mind? I had heard stories about people going mad in isolation, but this felt different. A soft noise broke the silence, almost a scratch, followed by a tap, 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 tap. I glanced toward the window, my eyes wide with terror. The tapping was coming from outside the cabin again, closer this time. I slowly crawled across the floor, too scared to make a sound, and peeked out through the crack between the curtains. There was nothing there, nothing physical, at least, but I could feel it, the presence, that strange weight, pressing against the glass. The trees outside seemed to shift, bending unnaturally in the light. And then, from the corner of my vision, I saw it. A face, just a glimpse, pale and gaunt, its features twisted and hollow, eyes like deep, black voids. It was there, for just a moment, and then it was gone. I slammed the curtains shut and backed away from the window, my breath ragged. It had seen me. I didn't know what it was, or who, or if it was even real, but it knew I was here. I was no longer alone in this cabin. The tapping continued, persistent, rhythmic, as if something was counting down, marking the moments left before I wouldn't be able to escape. Every few seconds, I could hear it tap, tap, tap. It didn't stop. My body trembled uncontrollably as I pressed myself into the corner of the room, my eyes wide, scanning every shadow, every movement. I needed to know what was happening, but I couldn't stay here forever. The lantern flickered again, casting long, trembling shadows on the walls. The air had grown thick, so thick that it felt like it was pressing in on me from all sides. The darkness wasn't just in the corners of the room. It was creeping toward me, as though it had a form of its own. Then, I heard something, a voice coming from somewhere deep within the walls, low and guttural. Just a faint whisper at first. It made my skin crawl. "It's been waiting for you." I froze. My eyes darted toward the floor, my mind reeling with the implications, waiting for me. How? I didn't understand. My breath came in ragged gasps, my thoughts a tangled mess, but I knew one thing: this cabin had something to do with whatever was stalking me, tormenting me. The whisper grew louder, more insistent. It's never been alone. You're not the first to come here, you know. My stomach twisted, dread seeping deeper into my bones. I had read the reviews before coming here. There was no mention of anything sinister, nothing warning me that this place was haunted or cursed. It was supposed to be a getaway, a retreat. But the more I thought about it, the more pieces started to fall into place. The cabin was too isolated, too far from the town. The land too strange. I had noticed strange things when I first arrived, nothing overt, but there was something off about the place. The way the trees were unnaturally tall, the way the air felt thick with history, as though the very ground held a memory or was reluctant to share. The voice continued, now almost a chant, building in intensity. They never leave. They never leave. A low creak sounded from the floorboards. I snapped my head toward it, my heart thudding in my chest. Someone was inside the walls. In the corner of the room, the shadows grew darker, thicker. I could feel them pulling, tugging at the edges of my vision. The figure from outside, the one I'd seen in the trees, wasn't a person at all. It was something older, something that had been here long before me, long before anyone. A spirit or something worse. It had been bound to the land, trapped here by something far more ancient than I could comprehend. I staggered to my feet, my breath shallow and fast. I needed to escape, but I had no idea how. The door was locked, the windows sealed shut, and this land had a way of holding people. I could feel it. My legs felt like they were made of stone. I stumbled to the window, my hand grasping the curtains. I yanked them open, desperate for a glimpse of the outside world. But the view was nothing like I expected. The trees, those tall, dark shapes had twisted. They no longer looked like trees at all. Their branches were skeletal, reaching out in gnarled, grotesque shapes, curling toward the cabin like arms ready to grab me, pull me into the earth. The sky was dark, not from nightfall, but from something far darker, like the stars themselves were being swallowed by an inky blackness. I spun around, stumbling back, my chest tight with fear. The voice grew louder, closer now. You shouldn't have come. You belong to it now. That's when I saw it. The figure, no longer a shadow, no longer a vague presence in the corner of my vision. It was fully formed now, standing at the center of the room, its cloak billowing as if caught in an unseen wind. But what stood inside that cloak wasn't a man or anything close to it. It was a thing, a shape made of darkness, its body flickering like flames beneath the fabric of the night, its face a gaping black void, empty of anything human. I backed away, my breath choked in my throat. The thing reached forward, its long, twisted fingers stretching out like vines, and in the corner of my mind, I knew that this was no spirit, no haunting. It was a curse, a force tied to this land, to this cabin, a thing that fed on isolation, on the terror of those who came here. The land itself had claimed me. You should have listened. The darkness inside the thing's cloak shifted, swirling. I could hear the whispers, countless whispers, rising like a chorus from deep within its folds. They were voices, lost voices, the voices of people who had come here long before me, people who had vanished without a trace. The thing reached toward me, its hand grazing my cheek with an icy touch. I felt my mind unravel, the room spinning as its coldness seeped into me, deeper than just my skin, into my very soul. You'll never leave. In that instant, everything clicked: the feeling of being watched, the oppressive weight in the air, the things I had dismissed earlier. This cabin wasn't just a retreat. It was a trap, a place designed to lure the desperate, the lonely, the curious, and keep them here forever. I screamed, a raw, guttural scream, one I didn't even recognize as my own. The thing's grip tightened around my throat, its fingers like iron chains, choking the air from my lungs. I gasped for breath, my vision swimming, black spots clouding my mind. I fought. I tried to push it away, but I couldn't move. And then, the voice came again. It's over. And with that, Everything went black. When I woke, I was outside. The air was cold, biting, and the first rays of dawn were breaking through the trees. I was lying in the dirt, covered in a thin layer of frost. My head throbbed, my body aching. I sat up, disoriented. The memories of the cabin still vivid, sharp like broken glass in my mind. The cabin was gone, not just abandoned, vanished. There was nothing left where it had once stood, just empty land, the trees standing tall and still, as though nothing had ever been there at all. I don't know if I imagined it all, or if something truly dark had taken hold of that place. I'm sure the locals won't speak of it, and I don't dare ask. But I know one thing: I'll never return to those woods, because there are things in the earth, beneath the roots, that we were never meant to understand. And some things, once they take you, never let you go.